Hi, everybody. I'm April Cummings. This is EDBEAT. Joining me, of course, Patrick Brendel from Cayman Current. Hey, Patrick, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Man, I'm feeling it today. Yeah, I mean, the school year is kind of winding down, right? So, exams for many of us, at least many of us, I forgot about the ones whose exams got pushed forward some, are over. Some of the kids are trying to not go to school right now because they don't think they're doing anything. So, life is interestingly chaotic. And I guess when it comes to education, there are always interesting things going on. I think that's fair, yeah?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. So we have a bit of a, I'm going to say what, elephant in the room. There was a situation that was reported to a certain degree in some outlets and not others at one of the local primary schools, Red Bay Primary, in fact. And I have to admit that as a journalist, it was quite difficult to report on it because I really wasn't able to verify some of the information that I was hearing. And so I was very kid's glove about this. And Patrick, I know that because you're on the education beat, as well. It is a sensitive issue. When you don't really know what's happened, it's kind of hard to cover it. But it did give you an opportunity to look into what may or may not be allowed in our public government schools.
Right. So I guess just going over the details that I felt comfortable reporting. There was
Absolutely.
an incident at Red Bay Primary first week of May, and there were complaints from parents, and it ended up resulting in a number of faculty members who were involved in it being the word is they were relocated from the schools uh,
Hmm.
until there's an investigation completed by what's called the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub. And that's
Yes.
basically the Department of Children and Family Services and the police. So they're investigating something involving teachers and students.
Exactly. And often we'll call it the MASH unit. So there are a variety of different areas they can cover. It's not only one thing, but the idea really there is to focus on the safety of children, whether that's emotional, physical, whatever it may be. And so we're still waiting on the outcome of that investigation. So it feels just kind of like we're in limbo a bit because we can't really say a lot about what's happened because they're looking into it right now.
Right. So, I mean, earlier this week, I just sent a follow-up email asking where they were in the investigation, and got a short but you know informative reply from the Ministry of Education saying the investigation is still ongoing. So, in this case, sometimes no news is news. So, we
Yeah.
did a story saying 6 weeks after this this being talked about publicly and the investigation started, they're still looking into it. There's no updates on it, and
Hmm.
there's just about 2.5 weeks left of school. So those staff members who have been removed from school may not be back by the end of the year.
Yeah. It'll be, I think, interesting. Again, this is our job, right? Is to kind of keep following up along the way to see what the final outcome is, and what information will be released in either direction. So that said, it does provide an opportunity, though, because there were some issues, and again, I struggle with how to characterize this, but there were issues around what may or may not be acceptable in the school environment when it comes to stuff around religion. Basically, that's I guess the best way I know how to phrase this without saying anything, right? What did you find when you looked into that?
Well, I filed an Freedom of Information request to the Ministry and Department of Education, asking them what rules, regulations, or guidance there are in the public schools in terms of the practice or promulgation or teaching of religion. And as the ministry and department have been very, very responsive in terms of open records requests,
Mhm.
They replied to me and with a copy of the Department of with a copy of the education law,
Mhm.
and which contains a couple sentences basically saying that you can't punish a student for violating a rule if it would violate their personal religion, and um, and then a copy of the curriculum for the religious education classes. Um, so basically, there's not, other than it being mandated that the government schools do provide religious education classes. Um, there's there really are no rules or regulations specifically on what one can or cannot do in regards to religion in the public schools.
And for folks who are from other jurisdictions, may not realize that religion is very, very prevalent in all of the government schools. You'll go into a classroom and the kids will greet you in unison and, ask, for God to bless you, or just it's part of the culture and the heritage of the Cayman community. But that may be something that people in certain other places may not expect to happen. So religion is woven quite freely throughout our schools. The question comes, if you're not of the Christian faith, how does that interact, or how do you interact with that if your child is in public school? It does raise some interesting questions and discussion points. And I'm actually neither here nor there because I grew up in this society. So this is what I expected. I was actually quite surprised when I went to the U.S. and found that some of these very things were not normal in the classroom. So it was really kind of an interesting situation for me. I actually looked a little surprised when there wasn't, prayer at the start of every school day in certain schools. I thought, what is going on here? So I do think that how people view things may vary based on where they're from and what their experience is. But regardless of what you think about religion and faith-based education, there is still a question about what you can and cannot do. And it does seem like we do have a lot of leeway in Cayman that people may not realize exists based on what you found.
And I've been doing some other research as well, and it's not that dissimilar to the laissez-faire approach in the UK schools as well. So
Correct, yeah.
in the UK public schools, or I think they call them like the opposite of what we would call them here.
Yeah.
But in the UK government schools, it's really at the head teacher's discretion how much or how little religiosity they put into the school environment.
Right, interesting. So this is not the only issue that you've been keeping an eye on. And I know, I think was it last year, November, I think you mentioned, you took a look kind of not just, what was happening in terms of school closures and COVID and impact locally, but you took a look at what was going around the different territories, didn't you?
Yes. So moving on to COVID-19. Um,
Yeah, it never
back,
seems to go away.
yes,
It's always
back
present.
last year towards the beginning of the school year, I took a look around. I call them our neighboring jurisdictions, and that can be culturally as well as geographically. And took a look at where these territories were in terms of the pandemic, how many cases they've had, how many deaths they've had, and then how that had affected their approach to school.
Hmm.
And so now that we're reaching the end of the school year, I basically repeated the exercise with the same group of jurisdictions. Um, and I found that may not be surprising uh, to many here is that Cayman school year is just about has about as close to normal as anywhere else, or more. It's been more normal
More
than in a
normal.
lot of other places.
Yeah,
Um,
certainly.
so I looked at places like the British Virgin Islands, which has had the same minimal level, similar minimal levels of COVID as
Mhm.
Cayman. We've looked at Cuba, which has among the larger countries I looked at, they've done the best in terms of keeping COVID under control. But
Okay.
for example, their schools have been closed since January.
Right.
Um, so, and Jamaica has been kind of hit by rolling school closures that really have the authorities there worried about major learning gaps. And
Mm.
one statistic that jumped out at me is the education minister in Jamaica estimated that up to 25% of kids just basically have fallen out of the education system there.
Wow, that's huge.
And if you go to our friends in the North Atlantic, in Bermuda, which has taken a different approach to COVID and has had more than, I think they've had 33 deaths in Bermuda from COVID, and they've been operating on, shutting down schools from time to time and quarantining people as outbreaks occurred. So they've been trying to manage it as they go.
Hmm.
And then if you look in places like the US and the UK, um, the COVID cases are far, far more prevalent than here. Just for an
Yeah.
example, if you look at New York State, which has had the most COVID out of the places I looked at, they've had nearly 100 times as many deaths per capita than Cayman has. So we've had two in Cayman due to COVID. So if we had in the same situation as New York, that would be 200 deaths.
I see.
And
I see.
their schools have been open and closed again for months. And the latest from New York is the governor said if things keep going on the same positive trajectory that they have been lately, then they may be able to open um, for in-person learning fully open in September. So that's a whole year.
Yeah,
So you can
it's
imagine
quite
in
extensive.
Cayman, as two parents talking to each other, we know what a disruption it was for having to
Hmm.
do it for 3 months.
Yeah.
Imagine having to do this for a full year or even longer.
And I point out that I've called it the Cayman bubble more than once, but the fact that we did go through such an extreme lockdown for that few months. My concern was that once we kind of went back to the way things were before, should something occur in the future, we won't be ready for it because we've so quickly reversed back to I mean, just about, yes, there's still, kids are wearing some masks in school and on the bus sometimes, and there's a bit here and there, but it's certainly not, the kind of rigorous, intense, sanitizing process that's not the right word, but I still like to say sanitize anyway. And so I think what did concern me, and probably still does to a degree, because our borders are still closed. There may be some people coming back and forth, but truly it's not on the kind of scale that we were used to as a tourism destination. I do have the concern that we've gotten so comfortable, both literally and emotionally, that if we had to go back to that other way, it would be really challenging for us. I know some schools are still doing drills, by the way, like Web Tuesdays or Web Wednesdays, where they'll bring a device and make sure they can do all their work that way. But I almost feel like we worked really hard there, and we got into a system, and then we were great. We're free. We can do whatever. And I know that our kids did have some degree of negative impact because they did lose some time for those few months. They didn't lose a whole year like some other places, but I do worry that it's like a rubber band. If the rubber band ever gets yanked back, man, it can be twice as painful. So I don't know. It was one of the things that concerned me about how comfortable we've gotten here, and our kids here are going to be going. A number of them will be going to school overseas, other jurisdictions, other countries and stuff. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see what their observations are too when they get back. And I went off on a
Right.
weird tangent there, Patrick. That's my nature.
And I'm on another tangent. I read a study, I think it was out of Canada, and they indicated that the number one variable for COVID cases and keeping a look, the number one most effective public health measure was whether or not you restricted inbound travel. So
Mm,
regardless of masks and social distancing, and this is before the vaccines were rolling out, is places that were able to that were able and willing to shut down the travel from different jurisdictions, they were able to maintain control over COVID. Whereas ones that had all sorts of requirements but still had the travel, it still was
yeah.
blowing up. And I think you see
And
that in places like New Zealand and
mhm,
Cayman, obviously.
certainly. So in terms of, education, and no, it's a bit of a lull in some respects over the summer. I tend to worry about things like, I call it the gap, it's like the routine, back on the routines thing, but the routines with kids studying, school, learning, stuff that was all on a roll. And then the summer hits and suddenly, many of us aren't doing that in that way anymore. And so I am going to be interested in seeing kind of how some of us are going to navigate our way through the summer, because it's just a different time than it used to be. I mean, I don't know, it's not back to normal, but it's not extreme lockdown either. We are seeing more travel, people going back and forth. And so I am just curious, like I don't know what September is going to look like.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that even with the vaccines, which are so incredibly effective, 95% is unbelievable, and
Yeah, it's unheard of.
it's like almost double as effective as the seasonal flu vaccine. Um, but if you just look at the numbers, even if you had 100% of people being vaccinated, 5% can still get it. So
Yeah.
it seems kind of it seems reasonable to assume that when we do start opening, when we have the borders open and we do have people coming in, that the virus for the first time could really get in the community here and could
Hmm.
get into the school system. They've opened up the vaccinations here for children 12 and older,
Hmm.
but younger than that, you're not going to be vaccinated, and
Yeah.
luckily, if you are vaccinated, even if you get it, it's not this killer. Uh,
Yeah. It's not as
and
extreme.
then again, the variants we've seen so far, like, has it's been really much far easier on the kids, less dangerous for the kids to get it than the adults.
Yeah, I do still
Um,
worry, and I kind of understand the reservation about, as much as I want the borders open, believe me, well, except for the traffic, but that's a whole other story. I think I do have some concerns about, it's a state of being prepared for something that it almost feels like we just dodged a lot of it because of how it was handled early on. And so we don't have, that culture of over vigilant at the moment. I don't know if that's such a thing, but so I think, gosh, when things start to change a bit, we do need to be probably a little better prepared mentally, I think. Because when the first time rolled around, I mean, it was craziness, right? So, I'm like,
I was happy
do we
my
have
name
enough
started with
internet?
an E because I got first dibs on the grocery store.
Listen, I was never happier than I am to have my last name start with a C. I was like, this is a good day. So that said, we've got a couple minutes left. Is there anything you kind of want to touch on before we wrap up today?
Well, just on a more positive note in regards to COVID, because a lot of focus has been placed on schools being considered these possible hot zones for,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a bunch of people crammed in a tiny spot. They're little people, they're dirty. That's where a lot of we think the bugs come from anyway. But it's
It's
interesting
called
because
cooties, Patrick. Get it straight. It's cooties.
when I was doing the research for this article, came across mention of another Canadian study out of British Columbia, and they tracked a bunch of teachers and staff from the schools there, and they found that you were no more likely to contract COVID being in the school than you were
Hmm.
being in the outside community. So,
Interesting. Yeah.
so it may
Giving
it
me
may
some
not be
hope.
this. Yeah. But maybe not. Maybe school, maybe not something to fear so much.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it too. It's a little bit, from my perspective, a little bit of knowledge and information. And if you're thinking about it ahead of time, you're less likely to be in that. I'm sure this is not you, Patrick, but it's that my sudden panic mode when I'm not sure what's going on and I don't feel prepared for it is no good for anyone in the family. So I do a lot better if I sort of talk through some of the concerns and get information about it. And if there is any sort of preparation that I need to do, that I kind of work through it and do some research, because I don't want to be out with the wire brush and the bleach on my hands if that's not an effective thing, and nor is it necessary to do. So I do feel like it's a good idea for parents to kind of work through some of that stuff, especially if they're neurotic like me, just to kind of work through what your concerns are long before we get to that stage, so that you've had a chance to actually get, grown-up information that's, solid and researched. And so you just feel better, and you're actually better able, I think, to support your kids through any concerns that they might have heading, oh my gosh, are we all going to get sick, is one of the most basic things, right? You have a small child who's worried about getting ill because they have new students coming in from somewhere else. So I just think that kind of information is really, it's really helpful for folks. So before we go, just quickly, I always like to give people the contact information for both of us in case they have ideas for stuff they want to talk about. Patrick, you know the drill, as I go the wrong direction as usual. How
Yes,
do we reach
April.
you? Yes, April.
So
And
reach
April's
me
like,
at first initial, last name, P. Brendel at CaymanCurrent.org.
see, I
Or
tried to do the Brady Bunch.
yeah,
And then
WhatsApp me, call me, 326-5064.
And that's a number they can use to send story ideas, questions, things they'd like you to look into in the education space. But also, I want to mention, which we haven't in a little bit, that Cayman Current is a nonprofit. It is a nonprofit journalistic enterprise, and so donations are welcome as well. And so give Patrick a shout. You can check out the website at caymancurrent.org. If you've got stuff you'd like me to ask him, interrogate him about, make life very difficult, you can do that too. I'm at april@caymanlife.ky. And thank you so much, everybody, for spending a couple minutes with us talking about issues related to education.
Thanks, April.